Lindsay at Green Bay Botanical Garden here. Today we're in the English Cottage Garden and we're going to talk a little bit about dividing and planting irises. So it's something we're working on here at the garden, and I've been doing it a lot at home too. So if you want to come see right here, we got this really nice big iris right here. This is Cherub Smile, and I planted this back in 2011, so it's time to get it divided and moved around a little bit. It's kind of outgrowing its space. It started as a nice little clump, but you can see it's starting to grow into my alliums in here, into this nice little daylily, and I've got some purple coneflowers in here too. So the reason we want to divide irises is because when they start getting really big, sometimes they start flowering a little bit less prolifically. So by dividing them and dicing them up, we kind of like re-energize them, encourage them to start putting more growth out into their little rhizomes that they store all their energy in, and then that causes them to want to bloom a little bit more. So it's a pretty easy process. Typically with any plant, you want to move it, divide it, the season opposite it blooms. Irises typically bloom late spring, early summer, depending on the year. So typically we'd want to do this in fall. I like doing it in spring because the foliage is a lot smaller and you can see where your gaps are in your garden, so it's easier to see where you have space to put them. So all you really need is a little garden spade here, a little shovel, and you just kind of pop into the soil, and you see these things aren't very deep rooted at all, and it's okay if the soil falls off. You know, they got pretty shallow roots here, and this is the rhizome that spreads throughout the garden. You can see all these different rhizomes at the surface of the soil. It's totally fine for them to be growing at the surface of the soil. That's just how they like to grow. So can dig your little clumps out like this, and when you are digging your clumps of irises, you want to watch out for any weeds that might be growing in them and pull those out, because you don't want to transplant your weeds or give them to a friend unless it's a friend you maybe don't like as much. But then any of these little rhizomes that have little like dried up, scuzzy, mushy parts in them, you want to either throw those out or cut them off, because that could be diseased tissue and you don't want to spread disease either. So, and you just kind of keep using your shovel. You know, a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to kill my plants, I have to be super, super gentle. A lot of plants are a lot tougher than we give them credit for. So just get in there, and if you damage a little bit of the foliage, that's okay. They've got all summer to recover. And another reason I like doing this in spring is because spring weather is a lot cooler in Wisconsin. We tend to have a lot of rain, and that way when you get these moved into your garden, you have Mother Nature is watering them in for you, and they're less likely to get stressed out, say end of summer, early fall, when it can be very warm, and sometimes we're in drought here. So this Cherub Smile that I dug up today, I don't want any more of that in the garden here, so I'm going to save that for later. We might give that away to some of the other horticulturists here. So then when you're done, you just kind of fluff the soil over and got a little bit smaller clump here. So we're going to move down the garden. I have a clump of a different iris that I brought from my home. This one is a nice pretty purple color. I'm not sure what it is because I got it from a friend, and I don't know, it's just really pretty, so that's why I like growing it. And that's kind of part of the cottage garden nature too, is getting plants from friends and sharing plants with your friends and family. So to plant these guys, you can see this got some nice big healthy rhizomes on it, and you want to plant these at the same depth that they were when you pull them out, so you don't want to bury these rhizomes too deep, otherwise they're going to rot. So you just kind of keep them at the surface of the soil, like when we were digging the ones out there. So you can take your shovel if you have really hard soil and dig a big hole, but the soil, thankfully, in the cottage garden is pretty loose from all the moving around and planting every year. So I'm just going to use my nifty soil knife to get these guys in the ground. And I just kind of dig a shallow little trench here. It doesn't have to be super, super deep. And then I just picked the spot right here because it's a hole where I don't have any perennials right now, and I feel like we could use some nice purple color in summer. So if you have a lot of these roots growing around here, you want to make sure those get covered with soil when you put them in the ground. So I kind of fold them under a little bit just so they, you know, are sitting underneath the soil when I set them in the ground. And if you have a lot of little clumps, you can put them together to make a big clump of irises. It'll take a couple years for them to really spread depending on the weather and your conditions at your home garden. So it doesn't have to be anything too fancy here. And then you just take your loose soil and make sure you cover all those roots up so they don't dry out. And it is okay to get a little bit of soil on top of the rhizomes. I usually like to sprinkle a little bit in there just so when you water these in, all that soil goes into the air pockets, so then the roots are able to get all the moisture out of the soil and they don't dry out and die. So just kind of sprinkle some of that soil in there and then fluff the soil around so it's nice and pretty. And then you always want to water anything in that you move, even if it's going to rain, just to make sure we settle soil in those air pockets out of there. And just very gently water it in. And you are pretty much all set to go then. So, you know, Mother Nature, I'm sure it's going to rain a little bit more this spring, so now it'll keep my iris nice and healthy and happy. And then hopefully this summer it will bloom. If not, you know, next year it'll have a nice new root system and be all set to go. So that's basically how it is to divide and transplant irises. Nothing too hard, nothing that you can't do at your own home. So if you have some growing, go ahead and do it. Share your pieces with your friends, your neighbors, family, or just move them to a different part of the garden. Today we are in the English Cottage Garden. We're going to be showing you some of the things that are starting to come up this week. We're still not at our prime peak bloom yet. That's going to be in a couple weeks here, so we'll show you a couple of the cool little things that are coming up though. First of all, if you're not familiar with the English Cottage Garden, it is called the Cottage Garden because back in the days of the lords and ladies and kings and queens, the castles had a lot of workers that would tend to the gardens, and they typically did not have as much money as the kings and queens, so they had their little areas or their cottages where they lived and had a lot of random plants in here that they brought back from the estates or from friends and family. They kind of like to swap plants, so it's a very informal planting, kind of design on the fly, anything goes sort of a thing. So that's where the roots of the English Cottage Garden lie. So some of the cool things that are blooming this week, if you want to come up here, we have this really teeny tiny miniature daffodil. This is called Mite Daffodil right here. It is small but mighty, haha. So this guy we got, I forget if we got it from Brent and Becky's last year or Color Blends. This is as tall as these guys are gonna get here, and I think this little patch here, that bag of bulbs, is like $50 or $100. So very expensive, but really cool because they're so super tiny. So that's a cool little thing that just came up this week that I'm excited to see how those go. And daffodils are typically critter proof, so you don't have to worry about spraying them with liquid fence for the critters to chew on. You know, things will pretty much leave them alone. So that's a pretty cool little guy coming up. We have some strawberries that I planted last year. These were seed-grown strawberries from All America's selection called Deliz. They are pretty much ever-bearing strawberry. We get them fruits pretty much all throughout the summer. Fortunately, the chipmunks like them a lot too, so I did not get many myself last year, but the chipmunks had a really good strawberry feast throughout the season. So I've got those planted along the border here. So those are pretty cool and exciting to be coming back. And last year we had a fig that we were overwintering in the pots in our greenhouse, and it's getting a little too big for what we could manage. So this year we decided to plant in the ground and overwintered outside. So that's why we have some mulch around the base here. In a couple weeks, probably next week, I'll uncover that once the danger of frost is gone, and this can hopefully start coming back. We did get quite a few fruits off of it last year, so it's kind of a fun, different, unique cottage thing that may or may not survive, but my fingers are crossed that it's going to come back, so it's pretty cool looking. So then over here we have a lot of little seedlings coming up in the cottage garden. A lot of plants are heirlooms, perennials, annuals, a lot of things that reseed. So I've got a lot of seedlings that are starting to come up, and typically we have volunteers help me tangle this mess in here, and it's National Volunteer Week, so we just want to say that we miss all of our volunteers, and we can't wait for you guys to come back, because now especially we're really realizing how much you do help us in the gardens, because now I have to tackle this whole mess by myself. So I've got my work cut out for me, but it'll be okay. We're just looking forward to them coming back. So some of the seedlings that are coming up that are pretty prolific right now are these little guys right here. This is called field larkspur. It's a really purple, airy flower that in a couple weeks should be up and blooming depending on the weather. But as you can see, we've got like a pretty big carpet of these guys here. So they are very prolific cedar, and I don't want it growing everywhere because it will just take over the garden. So I'll probably come through next week or so and these guys get a little bit bigger with my Soy and Life or a garden hoe to kind of thin these out a little bit so they come up and just kind of fill the gaps instead of being the entire mass planting. So those are some of the cool things we have coming up today. As you can kind of see, you know, you're not missing a ton yet. We don't have everything up and blooming. The daffodils are just starting and some of our earlier stuff, but the tulips and a lot of our late spring bloomers are probably not going to be peaking till about like Mother's Day, our typical taste bud time, mid-May. So, you know, if we're not able to get you guys here before then, we'll make sure to give you a lot of pictures and videos of all that stuff, you know, virtually, so you can enjoy. So stay tuned and keep checking out our website, gvbg.org, for more updates.